Hello and welcome back to another episode of Advanced RC Adventures. A2RC here. This is a channel where we investigate, explore, build and explain, upgrade and advance Nitro RCs to another level. Come start a new adventure with me. And the new adventure today is exactly what we have. This is not just an ordinary adventure. This is kind of an epic, unicorn sharing kind of engine overview for you today. We've got an OS engine, 18TZ. This is unfortunately a discontinued engine these days, but something that is exciting to share. Let's break this open and get the adventure started. This is a brand new 18TZ. It's already been cleaned, inspected, re-lubricated, put into the sealed bag. Let's get it cut open. This Nitro engine overview may not have been possible if it weren't for a very great friend and another Nitro engine enthusiast, Adam Floyd. Some of you may know him or not. He's very visible on Facebook and a lot of the different groups and posts so many of his epic RC builds. So big shout out to all the subscribers and friends in the Nitro hobby, especially Adam. Take a look here, OS 18TZ. This engine originally came in 3 different flavors, so to speak. This particular one is a standard crank with a rotary carb. OS also offered a short crank with a rotary and an SG crank with a slide carb. This particular engine is going on a future build that we'll get to and do some speed runs with, and it's going to be replaced with the 11K slide carb from OS to go onto that build. Like all of our engine overviews, we're going to take off the carb, have a little conversation, pop off the back plate and the head, take the entire engine apart, take a look at the internals, discuss some specs. We're going to do a small comparison with the OS 18 CVR with the 18TZ. So come along for the adventure and let's get things started. So first let's pop off this carb. This uses a standard 6mm pinch bolt nut. First thing you notice is one of the biggest upgrades and updates of the engine, though there are a number, is an insulated carburetor. Both the slide carb as well as the rotary carb are 6.5mm bore and insulated to help keep the air going into the engine as cool as possible. Something to note that the 18 CVR is not an insulated carb. It uses a much smaller, I believe 10mm bore. This one uses kind of the standard 13mm insulated bore. And the other thing to note is that the TZ as well as 18 CVR uses the larger diameter 16mm big block style inlet. So these use that .21 and big block style air filters, giving you a number of more options and definitely will not have any restriction to flow when you put those on there. The other thing to note about cooling is that there are heat sink or fins all over this engine, completely all over the bottom portion, the back plate. It's fin on top of fin on top of fin, even on the neck for the carb bore there, helping to keep this larger displacement 18 style engine as cool as possible. So like we do on most of all of our overviews, I'm going to go ahead and give her a little measure, give our bolt a measure here. Looks like this is a 7mm long bolt, and we're measuring at 2.51, and so that generally is going to tell us that this is an M2.6 bolt. Make sure you know what size bolts that you have and need to use for your particular engines. These backplate bolts can range between 2.5 and 2.6. So let's pop off this backplate and take a little look inside. Make sure that your piston is up. You don't know if this is an interference engine or not, if you're not aware. Give your backplate a little wiggle. First great thing I see is that we have an O-ring seal here. This is a standard butyl O-ring. This is a semi-interference engine. Notice that little cutout there on the backplate. Take a look at all of the fins there, acting as heat sinks all over the engine, and we have an arrow pointing up towards that cutout there on the backplate for orientation. Take a look down inside, look at the internals for the first time. Some beautiful stuff going on inside of there. Let's pop off this head and keep things going. So we have our head here. Let's take out those head bolts. While I got them in my hand, let's go ahead and give these a measure as well. So these are an M3 bolt, which is great high quality stuff. And looks like it's a 17mm head bolt, which is rather long for a small block, but that definitely will grip down into the block, having more thread engagement and be able to have a lot more robust clamping force for that head and shim stack. So these heads are pretty beautiful. I'm not a big fan of all blue. I'd rather have silver or black or maybe some other color, but OS blue is definitely their standard and become their standard. But nonetheless, the head is pretty unique and definitely does a job with all of these cooling fins. Got that sweeping shine cut there, which is an iconic kind of feature for the TZ lineup. This is a button head, so it has a lower head that goes onto the upper head here. Something to note is that this is a bi-directional head, so that means airflow can go in one way and out the other, but it cannot go through the other directions. And that is different than the 18 CVR head. The 18 CVR head is multi-directional. It can have airflow going through 4 different sections of the head. This has an integrated head button, and this is a standard plug, whereas the 18TZ is a turbo plug engine. You can see the color difference as well between the two. I don't know if it's the perfect way of saying it, but this is a darker, deeper kind of navy matte style, whereas this is more of a vibrant, brighter blue anodization. And while we have these in our hands, I want to bring out the scale and let's do a little bit of weight comparison. I haven't done this yet. This is going to be a surprise for me too. I'm just curious. So we have the 18 CVR head here. We're measuring in grams, and we have exactly 70 grams for the 18 CVR head. And then we have the 18TZ head here. Let's go ahead and weigh that. 55 grams. So that's a significant difference. And you might be thinking, well, we need to add the head button, so let's go ahead and do that. Put this on the bottom. Maybe we'll just flip it over to make it easier. And we have 59.6, 59.5. So even with the head button put in place, we have a significant weight difference between the 18 CVR head, which is a great engine, and the 18TZ. So that's enough talking about the head, even though it is fun and interesting and a big topic of conversation for the 18TZ. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that it is a turbo plug. So this is the lower head, or the head button. And let's see if we can get the head shim off of here. Right now there's one copper head shim. And this is a 0.1. There might be another head shim on the engine as well, because I'm thinking there's supposed to be 2, and there is. And there's a brass head shim here. So we have a 0.1 copper Let's measure this. And we have a 0.2 brass. So that's a total of 0.3 for the shim stack. And I would say that's a pretty good start for any small block shim stack. Let's keep going. Let's take off this prop nut. Let's get the piston and sleeve out. Brand new sleeve. It's an ABC sleeve. We'll talk about that here in a second. Rotate our piston up. See if we can't get the connecting rod off easily. Drop that out the bottom. Push out our standard crank. And before we take a look at that, let's go ahead and look at the block all by itself. We have chrome steel bearings front and rear, but something to note, because there's a lot of different upgrades for this 18TZ compared to the 18 CVR, is first being the front bearing. This front bearing is actually larger than the CVR. The CVR had a 7x17x5, but this 18TZ uses a 7x19x6. So that's a big upgrade. But the rear bearings are effectively the same between the two at a 12x21x5, and both use a chrome steel bearing. We have a rear exhaust, which definitely helps with performance and efficiency for the engine compared to a side exhaust like the 18 CVR has. Everything here is kind of a matte bead blasted kind of finish for the engine block. It's not polished whatsoever, but it's definitely a very nice matte aluminum finish. Utilizing the standard small block engine mount flanges. This is essentially the same size as the 12 CVR block. So even though this is a larger displacement 18 size engine, it's a 3.0 displacement engine, it effectively fits in all the same spots that a normal small block engine would be able to fit in. And let's come on over here to the crank. This is going to be very similar, very reminiscent of the 18 CVR crank. There's a lot of similarities, but it takes the 18 CVR crank and does a number of different modifications to it. Let's pick up the 18 CVR crank here. You can see that's effectively the same size. The rear bearing is both the same, so it uses a 12mm bearing. These are both standard style cranks, which is what I need for my particular build, and that's what I was seeking out. Let's take a look here at the balance lobe. This particular crank has a little nub for a pull start, but it's effectively the same. The rod journals on both of them are the same size. The induction bore is the same size, and we'll give that a little measure, but take a look at the differences to the machining on the balance lobe. So let's put the CVR down and take a little look here. The intake induction port here is massive in a sense compared to the two. This is not drilled and filled. The design, what I found out is that it mimics a lot of the EFRA and Roar Legal style machining for the inlet. It's a very wide opening, and it has milled chamfers that help lead that mixed air to go down inside of that bore. And it's got a nice big sweep in here that acts similar to the silicone filled cranks to get that air and fuel mixture inside and sweeping towards the back. You can see here they did some weight reduction at the back side of the connecting rod journal. Did a lot of cutting here on the balance lobe. We have a milled out machine edge for the leading edge of the balance lobe here. And we have a little sweep fang coming out of the induction bore. So let's go ahead and measure that induction bore just so that you have kind of some insight. But this is effectively an 8mm, just under, I'll call it an 8mm bore, which is pretty large for a small block. And while we have our scale out here, let's turn it on again and let's measure the weight between the two cranks. They're essentially, again, effectively the same thing, but the 18TZ has a lot more modifications. So let's measure the CVR first. So 26.6 grams. And then we go back to the 18TZ crank, and we're at 25.3. So it effectively removed about a gram. Not a lot in weight reduction, but all the differences that we have here on the modifications definitely add up to a lot bigger, more bolder type of performance. So let's set these cranks aside again, move our scale out of the way. So let's move on over to the piston and rod assembly. And we'll do a little walkthrough in comparison to the 18 CVR version as well. This is a great looking piston. It's a flat top piston with a single oil groove on top. It's a captured wrist pin. There's clips on either side. This is a billet machined piston. And it's also milled on the inside of the skirt. That's going to be difficult to see, but that helps with flow inside of the crankcase and working towards the boost port. And this is a nice giant big opening to help support that boost port flow. And the best thing about this whole assembly is the connecting rod. This is a billet connecting rod. It's got kind of a moderate knife edge on either side. Extremely robust for the power output. Brass bushings top and bottom. And while we're talking about the piston, let's go over some horsepower numbers. Let's take out our piston here of the 18 CVR. Notice the color difference right off the bat. This is a billet machine piston as well. It's a captured wrist pin for the 18 CVR. This is a cast connecting rod. It still has brass bushings top and bottom, but there's no oil groove for the oil hole for the bottom rod journal. There's no knife edge. It's a quality OS type of component and assembly, but it just doesn't hold up to the same kind of construction and design as the 18TZ. So the 18 CVR, OS claims this to be about 1.35 horsepower and 32,000 RPM. I found an independent dyno study that had this engine at about 1.6 horsepower, and it came in at 61 ounce-inches of torque. Comparing that to the 18TZ, its initial claim is 1.8 horsepower. That's about 25% increase over the 18 CVR. But another independent dyno test showed that this actually achieves somewhere between 2.2 and 2.3 horsepower. That's closer to a 30% increase over top of that 1.6 horsepower dyno session for the 18 CVR. This has over 42,000 RPM, which is ridiculous for a larger displacement engine like an 18. Those are numbers similar to some race 12 engines. But one of the biggest factors, contributing factors to the power output of the 18TZ is its torque. This offers 83 ounce-inches. The 18 CVR, 61 ounce-inches, compared to 83 ounce-inches. These are big block numbers coming out of an 18 size engine. Now, the HPI branded Force built TNG 3.0 series also claims 2.2 horsepower, but that has not been independently verified with dyno. And when we went over a past episode comparing those TNG series to an 18 CVR, the 18 CVR beat out that Force 3.0. So my guess is that the Force 3.0 would be somewhere between 1.3 and 1.6 horsepower, but this 18TZ is just a totally different animal. So now let's go over to the meat potatoes and take a look at our sleeve. The 18TZ is a 5-port. It's a T5 variant of the CVR. It's ABC construction. So we have an aluminum piston, we have a brass sleeve, and we have chrome lining. That chrome lining inside, when compared to nickel, is much harder. It adds to the longevity and durability of the lining, and you're able to get the sleeves thinner than the ABN engines, which helps with overall weight and, even more importantly, heat dissipation from the sleeve in the combustion area out to those block fins to keep things cool. So let's go on and take a look at our exhaust port. A very large, wide open exhaust port with some dog ears that lead in to the rear exhaust portion of the block to help with efficiency and keep that combustion air flowing out as rapidly as possible to have as much horsepower as it's capable of. Let's go on over to the boost port here. It's a pretty big boost port, nice leading bevel into the port itself. We don't have any fangs here, but this is a very sufficient style boost port to help with power output. And then the star of the show really are these transfer ports. We have 2 transfer ports on either side, and with the integrated machining into the block, as well as with these 2 transfer ports here, it's able to aid in air and fuel mixture and flow to specific areas of the combustion chamber to help with efficiency and overall power creation. Little bevels there on the bottom side, no fangs. You know, just like anything, like the 15 CVR that I modified, this could definitely use a little bit of modification, but with the kind of power and the numbers that this 18TZ puts out, at the moment there's no need to touch it. This is such an exciting opportunity for me to be able to share an iconic unicorn engine these days with all of you, the 18TZ offered by OS. If you like these style of engine overviews, please feel free to check out some of the others that we've done in the past, and we look forward to sharing more and new and exciting adventures with all of you in episodes to come. And if you like 10 scale Nitro, and especially touring cars, then this is the place to be, and thanks for taking the adventure with me.